There is a memory older than breath, older than form, older than the stars you see when you close your eyes and drift inward. It does not speak in language. It moves like soundless waves through the soul. You felt it before in dreams that feel like places, in names that strike your heart like lightning, though you've never spoken them, in the ache of deja vu. Not a glitch in time, but a whisper of something true. There is a library not built by hands, no paper, no shelves, no doors to unlock, and yet it holds the imprint of every sigh your spirit has ever breathed, every joy it has ever burned in, every sorrow it has ever shaped itself through. You are not meant to forget this place, but the world teaches forgetting. It teaches logic and labels, and it leaves no room for what cannot be touched. So you dismiss the voices that arrived in silence. They are not books, they are not scrolls, they do not rest on dusty shelves waiting to be read. They are not held in temples or stored in distant galaxies beyond your reach. They are a current, a field of frequency of remembrance that pulses through all things not created by thought, but shaped by the eternal breath of consciousness itself. The Akashic Records, as some have chosen to name them, are not an archive in the way you've been taught to imagine. They are a living field, vibrant and vast, holding every echo of choice, every ripple of emotion, every silent knowing you have ever carried within you. They do not judge, they do not punish. They simply hold the full reflection of your journey, of all journeys, like light mirrored in water that stretches beyond time. Ancient mystics called this space Akasha, not a place, but a presence, not something found through travel, but entered through surrender. They understood what modern minds have only begun to grasp, that this field does not live outside of you. It lives within, woven into the fibers of your body, hidden in the weight of your dreams, braided into the longing that surfaces when the world feels both beautiful and unfamiliar all at once. Have you ever walked into a room and felt you had been there before, even when you knew you had not? Have you ever looked into the eyes of a stranger and felt your soul stir as if remembering something lost? Have you ever woken from a dream with tears that had no name, sorrow that did not belong to this life, yet was fully yours? That is not fantasy. That is soul memory rising from the Akashic field, a quiet call from the unseen asking you to remember. You were born remembering. You came into this life with whispers still clinging to your skin, with stories etched into your spine. But the knowing that truth is not taught, it is felt. But the world did not reward such knowing. It taught you to favor the measurable, to seek validation in metrics, to trade instinct for approval. So over time, the muscle of your memory atrophied, not lost, only silenced. You began to believe in reality as something fixed, forgetting that your essence came from the infinite. You began to chase purpose through achievements and overlooked the quiet wisdom pulsing in your chest. But the records never faded. They never left you. They wait, always humming beneath the surface of your daily life, behind the noise, behind the roles, behind the performance of being human. They wait for the moment when your attention softens and you hear again. Not with ears, but with resonance. They may come to you as images, as emotions, as questions that arrive like feathers on the edge of waking. They may appear in songs. They did not call it Akasha. They did not speak of records or fields or memory as energy, but they knew, spake the invisible currents that moved beneath their feet. They heard the quiet pull in the wind and saw truth written in the patterns of fire and rain. They were not scholars of the unseen. They were its companions, walking alongside the sacred like it was breath, like it was water, like it was home. Long before language became a wall, it was a bridge. Long before memory became data, it was rhythm, it was pulse. It was vibration shared in silence between hearts that understood without needing to explain. In mountain caves, in red deserts, in lush forests covered by vines older than memory, they listened, not for sound, but for frequency. Shamans pressed their hands against stones and felt the stories humming inside. Elders stared into the night sky and did not see stars. They saw questions, answers, symbols, teachers, guides. In temples carved into the earth, initiates sat in darkness until their eyes turned inward and their souls opened like seeds. They were not waiting for proof. They were not measuring truth in numbers. They entered the silence. They bowed to it. They became it. The yogis of India spoke of Akasha as the fifth element, the invisible substance that holds all others, not as metaphor, but as memory itself. They believed that thoughts were not fleeting sparks, but imprints left on a cosmic field, that every emotion, every intention, every breath sent a ripple through the ether that would echo beyond time. The Sufis spun until the veil dropped, until the world melted into presence, and the presence became song. The Gnostics searched not for teachings, but for the flame hidden behind every word. Monks wandered deserts for days in silence to hear the single thread of truth that connected all things. They were not inventing mystery, they were tuning into it. The pyramids may have been more than tombs. They may have been instruments of alignment, shaped to vibrate at frequencies that opened the mind and soul, 2 dimensions. We've forgotten how to name. Some say the priests who entered did not seek gods, they entered sacred space to remember themselves. You've seen glimpses of this remembering, even if you didn't name it, in the stories of prophets who woke from dreams and carried truths that changed the course of history, in oracles who sat beneath trees and whispered riddles that dismantled empires, in blind seers who looked beyond sight and saw what the eyes could not hold. They were not guessing. They were reading, not with eyes, but with presence, with resonance, with reverence. Though much of what they held has been erased, buried, mocked, or feared, the thread has never broken. It lives inside us, waiting, flickering in the quiet, knowing you carry but do not speak. In the instinct that pulls you towards something deeper when the world feels too thin. This is not about culture or creed or belief. It is about remembering the ancient language of the soul, the way it passes through bloodlines, the way it hides in lullabies, the way it burns quietly behind the chest when you hear something that makes no sense to the mind, but feels truer than anything you've ever known. The old souls lived in tune with this field. They didn't access the records as an event. They lived inside them, breath by breath, decision by decision. They were not perfect, but they were present, and that presence was their wisdom. You carried that same thread. You've touched it in dreams that left you crying without cause, in poems you wrote without planning, in moments of awe. So sacred, you could not speak, you need to travel to ancient lands or dig through forgotten texts to find what they found. You need only to be still enough to remember, because you are not separate from them. Your soul speaks the same frequency, and that is enough. There was a time when the world was alive with song, not the kind sung with voices, but the kind that trembled in the bones of trees and the stones that held the sun, and the river that whispered secrets to the stars. People once listened with their whole being. They moved in harmony. For what they could not see, they read the language of clouds and dreams and fire. They were not separate from the sacred. They were shaped by it. But then, slowly, the silence came. Not at once, not with thunder or flame, but like a slow unraveling, a forgetting disguised as progress. Truths once passed from breath to breath began to fade. Songs turned to echoes, temples emptied, seers grew quiet. And the ones who still remembered were told to doubt what they knew. The sacred was turned into secret. Wisdom was hidden behind walls, only for the chosen, the anointed, the approved. What once belonged to everyone was claimed by the few, and what could not be owned was burned. Libraries crumbled into ash scrolls, erased by conquest and greed. Languages disappeared, entire lineages of memory cut from the root, and beneath it all was a silent fear, the kind that hides behind crowns and titles and thrones, the kind that knows when a soul remembers who they are, they become impossible to control. So the dreamers were called mad, the healers were labeled dangerous, the women who carried the old ways in their blood were hunted. The ones who could feel beyond the veil were silenced, not because they were wrong, but because they could not be ruled. They called it reason. They called it science. They called it order. But underneath the new names was a hunger for power. Not knowledge, not truth, just control. You were told to trust the external, not the internal, to seek answers from experts, not from the stillness within, to dismiss the trembling in your chest. The dreams that felt like messages, the sudden tears you could not explain. The world grew louder with facts, but emptier of meaning. The mind was elevated, but the soul was starved. And the records, though never destroyed, slipped from awareness, not gone, only buried beneath layers of noise. Still, they whispered. In lullabies hummed two sleepless children, in myths told around fires, in stories passed in hushed tones from grandmother to granddaughter. The Akashic field did not disappear. It flowed underground beneath the surface of belief, waiting for hearts still soft enough to feel. And sometimes a child would be born who remembered not through, quote, knowledge, but through resonance. A poet who bled truth onto paper without knowing why. A prophet who saw too clearly and was cast aside. A dreamer whose visions burned too bright for a world afraid of mystery. They did not fit. They were told to be realistic, to grow up, to stop believing in invisible things. And many of them did, not because they were wrong, but because they were tired. Tired of not being understood, tired of carrying what others denied. So the silence thickened, but it never won, because truth cannot be destroyed, only delayed, and memory cannot be erased, only hidden in the records, living and luminous, still pulse beneath the surface of every soul, waiting for the day when the silence would crack and the remembering would begin again. You are not broken because you forgot. You are human. And forgetting was part of the journey, but deep within you, the thread remains. The quiet knowing, the ancient ache, the sacred pull toward something more. And in this moment, as you read these words, that thread is tugging, not asking you to return to the past, but to awaken to what never left, what never stopped humming beneath your skin, what never needed permission to be real. The great silence was never complete, because memory cannot be muted forever. Not when it is part of who you are, not when it sings in your blood, and now it sings again. You did not lose the knowing. It was taken gently, reshaped, slowly, not by malice, but by rhythm, by repetition, by 1,000 tiny moments that taught you to look outward instead of inward, to trust noise over silence, logic over feeling. When you were small, you remembered, you saw things others could not see, felt truths that no one explained. You played with light that flickered behind your eyes, danced with shadows that whispered stories of before. You spoke to the unseen and called it normal. You touched symbols in your dreams and woke up with the ache of something sacred pressed against your skin. But the world you entered had no room for that. No room for invisible friends, no space for dreams that carried messages, no language for knowing that defied explanation. They smiled and said you were creative, imaginative, dramatic. They told you stories were pretend, magic was fantasy, feelings were unreliable. And so you learned to doubt what was most alive inside you. At school, you were rewarded for answers that fit inside boxes, not questions that opened gateways. You learned the value of memorization, not memory, repetition, not resonance. At home, you were told to behave, to be sensible, to not make things up. And so you tucked away your strange insights, your wild dreams, your sudden griefs and joys that had no clear cause. Piece by piece, the remembering was softened, dulled, named as coincidence or imagination. You stopped mentioning the moments that made your heart race for no reason. You stopped drawing the symbols that arrived unbidden. You stopped asking about the dreams that felt too real. You learned how to be good, how to be productive, how to be acceptable, but in the process, you forgot how to be whole. You measured your worth in grades, in praise, in outcomes, and somewhere along the way, your soul's whisper became too faint to follow, too soft to trust, drowned out by the noise of expectation. Still, it tried to reach you, in the pull toward a book you couldn't put down, in the ache that rose when a song hit a note only your spirit understood, in the dreams that left you breathless with meaning you couldn't explain, in the quiet knowing that shimmered behind your chest when you stood at the edge of something beautiful and unknown. But each time it surfaced, life called you back to tasks, to timelines, to opinions, to doing what made sense. And so the voice within you learned to wait. You forgot how to listen, not because you failed, but because the world taught you forgetting was maturity, that certainty was better than mystery, that to belong meant to silence the parts of you that sang in frequencies no one else could hear. You began to identify with the role, the job, the name, the body, and you mistook those things for the whole of you. But you are not the mask. You, where you are the one beneath it, still luminous, still listening, still intact. Even now, your remembering is not gone. It is sleeping preserved in the folds of your being under layers of protection built to keep you safe. But you're older now, wiser, more ready than you were when the forgetting began, and somewhere in you, the record of who you truly are waits, untouched, unbroken, vibrating quietly with the same frequency you came here carrying. You may not remember the moment you were taught to forget, but your soul does. And more importantly, your soul remembers the way back. The Akashic field within you has not closed. It has only been waiting for your return, and now it begins to stir again. They weren't looking for it. They were searching for matter, for laws, for particles and precision. They were chasing the building blocks of reality, and yet, somewhere along the way, they stumbled into mystery. They peered into the atom and found not certainty, but wonder, not answers, but questions that bent the edges of what was known. They called it quantum physics, but to the mystics, it was recognition. It was ancient memory rising through a new vocabulary. The language had changed, but the shape of truth remained the same. They found that particles shifted when observed, that matter was not solid, but flickering, responsive, intimate with attention itself. They spoke of entanglement, of 2 points in space connected beyond time. They discovered that what happened here could affect what happened there. Instantly, invisibly, they found that time wasn't linear, that it curved, folded, looped, depending on who was looking. Some began to whisper about a field, not a force, but a potential, a matrix holding every possibility, not in matter, but in probability, not in space, but in awareness. They said information might never be lost, only transformed, that what we do, think, feel, might ripple through the fabric of existence long after it's gone. They did not use the word Akasha, but the mystics smiled, because they had always known that reality was a dance, that consciousness was not trapped in the skull, but woven through everything. They had always said the universe was listening, not with ears, but with presence. Meanwhile, neuroscientists traced memory beyond the mind. They found emotions living in muscles, trauma stored in breath, grief imprinted in posture. They studied epigenetics and found experience passed through blood, fear encoded in DNA, longing folded into the body like a prayer. They discovered that the body remembers what the mind cannot, that intuition is not guesswork, but guidance. That we carry more than just the genes of our ancestors. We carry their choices, their survival, their dreams and unfinished songs. The mystics nodded again, cause they had always said, you are your ancestors dreaming forward. You are the future, remembering the past. Even skeptics began to wonder, what if the brain is not a container, but a receiver? What if thoughts are not created, but accessed, tuned in like frequencies on a dial? What if the knowing you feel is not imagination, but alignment with a field that has always existed? The more they looked, the less certain they became. And in that space of uncertainty, the door cracked open, and the Akashic light began to pour through. Not in temples, not in rituals, quiet in labs, in journals, in quiet late-night theories that dared to say, maybe reality is not what we thought. Maybe memory is everywhere. This is not to say science has proven the Akashic Records. It hasn't. But it has begun to echo the same questions, the same awe, the same trembling sense that everything is connected, that there is more than we can measure, that what is felt is no less real than what is seen. And if we are brave enough to listen, brave enough to see these convergences not as coincidence, but as communion, then we begin to understand what the mystics always knew, that the sacred and the scientific are not enemies. They are mirrors. They are twins. They are echoes of the same deep field, speaking in different tongues. The Akashic field may not be a place. It may be a pattern, a pulse, a geometry of soul and space, a divine blueprint humming beneath what we call reality, and you are not separate from it. You are part of it, not one day in the future, but now, always. There is no key you must earn, no temple you must enter, no robe to wear or mantra to memorize. The records were never locked, only muffled beneath the noise of the world. They do not live above you, beyond you, or outside of you. They wait within, not hidden, only unheard. To access the Akashic field is not to climb, but to descend, not to rise higher, but to sink deeper, beneath the thoughts, beneath the striving, beneath the performance of being someone. There is a stillness that opens like a doorway, and that doorway is always within reach. Begin not by seeking, but by softening. Let the breath guide you, slow and quiet like water over stone. Let the body become present, not perfect, not rigid, just real. Let your feet touch the floor like roots, your spine lengthen like a bridge between sky and earth. Let yourself arrive fully in this moment, because that is where the records live, not in the past, not in the future, but in the now, so full it becomes eternal. Some find them in silence, some in movement, some in dreams that feel more vivid than waking life. Some hear them in music that stirs tears from places they didn't know held water. Others find them in nature, in walking slowly through trees, in the still gaze of animals, in the curve of a stone shaped by time and patience. There is no single ritual, no sacred script required. What matters is not the method, but the state, a state of sincerity, of surrender, of receptivity. The records do not respond to force. They open to frequency, to intention, to resonance. Sometimes they speak in visions, sometimes in sensations, sometimes in symbols that unfold over time. A feeling that returns again and again until you finally listen, knowing that arrives not with proof, but with peace. A sentence that writes itself through you before you even understand its meaning. You may not see a glowing library. You may not hear voices or guides, and still you will know, because something inside you will shift, will soften, will recognize itself. That recognition is the language of the records, not verbal, not linear, but cellular, intuitive, sacred. You access the records not to escape, but to remember, not to control, but to commune, not to master, but to merge with what you already are. It may feel quiet at first. The mind will expect fireworks, but the soul knows better. It knows that the deepest truths come not with the noise, but with a hum, a warmth, a gentle opening, like the petals of a flower uncurling in the dark. You do not need permission to enter. You only need presence. The more you strip away what is not you, the more you hear what has always been speaking. In the space between thoughts, in the moment, after the exhale, in the feeling that rises without warning and makes you pause. You are not calling something down from the heavens. You're tuning into what is already humming beneath the surface of your being. You are not summoning truth. You are remembering how to receive it. And the more you receive, the more you trust. And the more you trust, the more it flows. It's like a river freed from its dam, like breath returning to a body that had forgotten how to relax. This is not a technique. It is a return, and each time you choose it, the door opens a little wider. The veil thins a little more, and the records speak a little clearer. They have waited patiently for you, and now you are listening. You begin to move differently, not faster, not louder, but with a presence that needs no explanation, a steadiness that does not shout, a quiet rhythm that hums beneath your skin and speaks to something older than words. You walk into a room and no longer search for permission. You sit with your own energy and feel it anchor you like gravity made of light. The world around you may not change, but how you see it does. Patterns emerge where there once was chaos. Connections bloom between events that once felt random. The moments that broke you begin to make sense, not as punishment, but as pivots, as sacred ruptures that made space for a deeper unfolding. You no longer see pain as failure. You begin to see it as initiation, as a doorway to understanding that cannot be taught, only lived. You realize that your sorrow held sacred data, that your longing was not lack, but guidance, that your ache for something more was the voice of memory echoing through your bones. You stop asking others to name your truth. You no longer shrink to be understood. You no longer betray your knowing to be accepted. The need to explain yourself fades, because remembrance does not need validation. It simply is. And in that isness, you rest. Synchronicities become your language. You think of someone and they appear. You ask a question and the answer arrives in a song, a sign, a sentence overheard in passing. Life starts to shimmer with messages written just for you, not because you were lucky, because you were listening. You begin to trust the signals of your body. The tension in your chest becomes a compass. The pull in your gut becomes a path. Your emotions stop being problems to fix and start becoming portals to feel, to follow, to decode. You are no longer just surviving, you are attuning. Even silence becomes holy. Even stillness becomes rich. You find yourself crying without sadness, laughing without reason, because when you remember, your soul begins to exhale. The grief of forgetting softens into grace. The weight of pretending lifts, and the truth of who you are rises without force. And perhaps most beautifully, you become a mirror, not by effort, but by presence, by simply being what you are. Others begin to see themselves more clearly, not because you teach, but because you reflect, not because you lead, but because you remember. You carried the frequency of remembrance, and that frequency is medicine. Not loud, not flashy, but potent, like a scent that awakens a buried memory, like a melody that breaks the heart open in just the right way. People won't always understand you, but they will feel you. They will feel something shift in your presence, something soften, something stir. And they may not have words for it, but they will walk away changed. This is what happens when you remember not just the facts of who you are, but the feeling, the essence, the resonance of your soul before the world told you to forget. You remember not just your story, but your frequency, your design, your sacred sound. And as you remember, you rewrite the story from the inside out, not to erase what was, but to illuminate what always was, waiting beneath the surface, waiting for your return. You didn't find this by chance. It wasn't random. It wasn't luck or coincidence or just another moment lost in a scroll. Something in you reached toward this. Not your hands, not your eyes, but the part of you that listens without sound, that searches without maps, that remembers without reason. Maybe you didn't know what you were looking for. Maybe it came to you late at night when the world was quiet and your thoughts began to glow. Maybe it arrived like a whisper, like a subtle hum you almost ignored, but didn't, because something in you leaned in, paused, felt the pull. You've always known there was more, not more to have, but more to know, more to feel, more to become. You've always had questions that refused to be silenced, longings that refused to be satisfied with simple answers. An ache that lived inside your chest like a compass facing a direction no one taught you to follow. This is not the beginning of something new. This is a return to something ancient, something you felt before, perhaps in a dream, perhaps in childhood, perhaps in a moment of stillness when time softened and the veil thinned and something touched you. Just for a breath, you've always carried the frequency of remembering. Even when you didn't have the words for it, even when you doubted yourself, even when the world made you question what you felt so deeply, even when logic told you to dismiss what your soul knew to be true. You are not broken. You are awakening. You didn't need to be taught. You needed to be reminded. And now that reminder has arrived, not as instruction, not as proof, but as resonance. You feel it not in your head, but in your body, in your skin, in the part of you that knows before it understands. It's okay if you can't explain it. It's okay if it doesn't make sense to anyone else. It's okay if this opens more questions than it answers, because that is what real remembering does. It doesn't give you a conclusion. It gives you a doorway, a breath, a pulse, an invitation. You were drawn here because your soul never stopped calling, because no matter how far you wandered, no matter how long you forgot, stopped, something in you always kept the thread intact. Something in you always pointed home. In this moment, this very moment, is that thread tightening, the remembering rising, the signal becoming stronger, not to pull you away from life, but to pull you deeper into it, not to disconnect, but to reweave. This is your soul recognizing itself. This is your ancient knowing stirring beneath the noise. This is the light behind your eyes, remembering the sound of its own name. You don't need to figure it all out right now. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to share it. You need to do is feel it and say yes, yes to the remembering, yes to the return, yes to the truth that was never gone, only waiting. This isn't the first time you've touched this frequency. It won't be the last. And every time you do, the path becomes clearer, the silence becomes sacred, and the remembering becomes yours again. They were never lost, only misplaced in the folds of our forgetting, only covered over by noise, by pace, by progress that asked us to trade our inner knowing for outer success. The Akashic Records were never hidden behind doors or sealed inside scrolls. They were never removed from you, never made distant. They were not buried in ancient sands or burned in libraries, long turned to ash. They remain where they have always been, in the breath between thoughts, in the space behind your eyes when you dream, in the stillness beneath the sound, and the way you sometimes pause mid-sentence and feel the presence of something older than words, something that does not shout but sings in silence. You carry them, you always have. Not like a weight, but like a pulse, like a low hum that's always been playing beneath the chaos. They're encoded in your cells, in the trembling of your voice when you speak truth, in the softness that enters your body when something resonates so deeply that it feels like coming home. They live in the subtle realms where language dissolves and presence speaks, where memory doesn't mean recalling dates or names, but returning to essence. They live in the moments when you feel tears without sadness, when you recognize someone you've never met, when you arrive somewhere new in your body size, with relief like it has finally returned. This is the remembering, not dramatic, not loud, but sacred and slow. It unfolds in layers, like petals opening to light, like mist lifting from water. The records are not just something you access, they are something you become, a vibration you carry, a frequency you reattune to. And as you remember, the world begins to shift, not because it changes, but because you see it differently. The symbols start to speak again, the dreams start to instruct, the coincidences begin to feel more like choreography, the chaos starts to reveal a pattern. You feel yourself less drawn to noise and more drawn to stillness, less interested in answers and more willing to sit with questions. You stop needing certainty and begin to trust resonance. You stop chasing and begin to listen. And in that listening, the field begins to open. The Akashic Records were never information for the mind to consume. They were wisdom for the soul to embody. They were never meant to be analyzed, but felt, not decoded like puzzles, but entered like prayer, like breath, like remembering. The lyrics of a song you never learned, but always knew. And they do not open just once. They open again and again, deeper each time, revealing not only the patterns of your own soul's journey, but the way those patterns are interwoven with all others, because nothing is separate, not truly, and the records are the proof, the living proof that all is held together in sacred memory. You see it in the repetition of wounds, in the return of lessons, in the way the same archetypes dance through different faces in different lifetimes. You see it in the way healing ripples backward and forward, in the way choosing truth now frees ancestors who could not speak, in the way remembering yourself reawakens 1,000 forgotten voices. If you begin to realize that your life is not a random collection of moments, but a map, a message, a mirror, each joy, a breadcrumb, each heartbreak, a door, each loss, an invitation to return to the center of what cannot be taken from you. And even in forgetting, you were never off course. Even in silence, the records were speaking. Even in confusion, your soul was guiding you back to this remembering, not as punishment, not as a test, but as the most sacred kind of love, the kind that never leaves, only waits. Okay? And when you remember, you begin to walk differently, not because you know everything, okay, but because you finally trust what you've always known. You begin to live in alignment, not with someone else's path, but with your own original rhythm, your divine imprint, the geometry of your becoming. You begin to see life not as something to conquer, but to honor, not as something to survive, but to co-create with. You stop needing to prove your worth, because you feel your worth in your bones, in your breath, in your being. And the more you remember, the more the field responds. It begins to reflect back your alignment. The synchronicities multiply. The messages sharpen the guidance, clarifies. You meet people who speak your frequency, You hear truth in places you never thought to look. The veil thins, not through force, but through permission. The more you allow, the more you receive. The more you soften, the more you see. The Akashic Records are not some far-off cosmic library, sparing. They are the subtle blueprint, vibrating through every cell of your existence. You are not just accessing them, you are made of them. Your breath is inscribed with memory. Your touch echoes with timelines. Your silence holds the resonance of every life you've ever lived. Every lesson your soul came here to hold, every gift you were meant to unfold. You were not created to forget forever. The forgetting was part of the journey, but the remembering is part of your return, okay? And now, in this moment, the return has begun. You feel it, not as fireworks, but as peace, not as answers, but as a soft clarity that fills the space where doubt once lived, not as certainty, but as sacred trust in what you feel, even if you can't yet explain it. And that trust is the key. Not trust in something outside of you, but trust in what rises from within. 'Cause the records don't need belief. They respond to presence, to reverence, to your willingness to receive. You are not too late, not too far, not too flawed. Everything you need to hear, the records already lives within you. Every moment of pain, every instinct you dismissed, every fragment of wonder you tucked away, all of it is part of the path back. You are not remembering to escape your life. You are remembering to inhabit, yet more fully to bring the frequency of your soul into the choices you make, the words you speak, the relationships you tend, the dreams you dare to follow. You are not here by accident. You are the record remembering itself, the thread reweaving into the fabric, the light returning to the grid. And every time you choose presence over performance, stillness over striving, alignment over approval, you deepen your connection to the field. You become more fluent in its silent language, more attuned to its gentle nudges. This is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of a deeper unfolding. Because once you remember, you are never the same. You may forget again, you may doubt again, but something inside you will remain awake, and that part of you will always lead you home. The Akashic Records were never lost. They were only waiting for you to return to the quiet, to the breath, to the truth that never left, to the place where remembering is not a task, but a release, not an effort, but a surrender. And now, the remembering is yours, not borrowed, not taught, but lived, embodied, real. You are not seeking truth, you are becoming it, and the field knows you. It always has. It recognizes your vibration, your design, your path, and it opens again and again each time you choose to meet it. This is where you return. Not to an old version of yourself, but to the part of you that was never lost. The part that always knew, the part that never stopped waiting. The records are not pages, they are presence. They are not a destination. They are a homecoming. They are the memory of your wholeness, woven into every breath, every beat, every becoming. And now, they are awaking you again, not as something you read, but something you live, not as something you study, but something you feel, not as something distant, but as something you are. You are the remembrance. You are the record. You are the return.